Back. So today we're talking about combat, and the first thing in combat that always has to happen is this lovely little thing called initiative. Unlike other 20+6 games, Sellswords uses a pretty detailed initiative system, and here's why. Sellswords was designed to incorporate many levels of combat into one rolling system. So the same rules that apply to a skirmish should also apply to a duel, should also apply to a battle, should also apply to a war. And that was to speed up the idea of how to resolve such things in a faster method than I've seen other games do. But at the same time, players like seeing things on the battlefield and feel like they're in charge. And that involves tactical movement on the battlefield. In one of the games I played in my youth, which I really loved, called Battletech, they brought up a very interesting problem that happens in most tabletop games, of a character will get an initiative score and be able to act before everybody else. Now picture he charges a line of bad guys, he attacks, and now he can't do anything for the rest of the round while they all attack him. Not only that, what if he has the initiative and he acts, even though he's supposed to be perceiving the world faster and with more alacrity than they are and more perception, yet when he's done acting, he can't stop any of his opponents acting. So the answer we came up with in Sellswords is to do exactly what Battletech did. And the colloquialism for that is move last, act first. So what that means is we're going to roll initiative for everybody on this board. Now, the sage has decided the two players will roll our red and our black die. And there's their scores, which seem pretty bad at first, but we'll get to bonuses here in a second. And what you can do is you can put the dice right next to your character so it's clear who's got the higher initiative sequence. That's not necessary, but I find it helpful. If there's a lot of people on the board, it can get junked up pretty quick, so use your discretion. The sage rolls for the people around him in the crowd 3 dice. And ends up with a 5, a 4, and a 5, which means that people in the crowd will be acting before our heroes. And then, unknowns to the heroes, there are 2 special NPCs in the area. The sage rolls secretly initiative scores for them. Now, I need to roll one for the merchant, don't I? Okay. Now, in Sellswords, you have an initiative bonus based off your perception and your agility. You look at the 2 stats, and the lower of the 2 stats is the bonus you receive. So if you had an agility of 4 and a perception of 3, you'd have to go with your perception of 3. 3, being the standard rating, is no bonus, which is what our merchant has. So the merchant's acting on sequence 1, which is the slowest. Our 2 thievy characters, however, have pretty high agility and perceptions, so they actually have an initiative bonus of +1 each, bringing them up in the initiative total to 2 and 5. This is pretty fortunate for them, because heroes always win ties. And we're going to go ahead and do one other thing here, although it wasn't rolled. Should anyone roll a 6 on their initiative, they roll another d6 and they add it to that total, plus any bonuses they may have. Now, unfortunately for our players, 2 of our special guys also have initiative bonuses. And so the sequence is pretty extreme. The crowd is acting on 7 with the highest initiative. The crowd also has a 5 and a 4. The 2 NPCs over here have a 5 and a 4. And one of our poor players has a deuce. The player with the 5 will end up acting before the characters with him who have a 5, but also moving after them. So, one more time. The lower initiative scores have to move first. This means they have to declare their actions first, as well as move on the battlefield. The merchant decides that her action is first to spend a skill action to yell for help. Stop, thief! She's then going to turn, and she can't actually work a grab on the hero yet because it's not the attack phase. So instead she declares that she's going to follow him. That means wherever he moves, she will move right after him if she makes an athletics check. However, his buddy behind her with the 2 decides, we ain't having that, and decides what she's going to do is attack this woman and then try to get out of the way. Now, unbeknownst to our merchant, the character with the red hair has a special feat that allows her to move after she's acted. That's very important because normally the way the combat system is set up, all movement has to be done first. The merchant declares her fighting intensity, which is something we'll get into later. Right now we're just going to leave it blank. The character behind her declares her fighting intensity. And now we get to the people who had 4, the next highest initiatives. This character moves out of his cover and reveals himself. And he decides that it's vital for him to help cut this street off because someone yelled, "Stop thief." So he moves into the road and he waits. The other character with the 5 does the same thing. Oh, and all the crowd with the 4, they spend a turn to look around and do nothing. They're not even extras. I guess we'd call them background characters. There's not really much they can do. But I had the sage roll them so that if the sage wanted to have the crowd do something, they could. The crowd next to that's happening will do something. They all declare standard action, and they all start to move in to block off our thieves. And the thief with the 5 says, "Stop." One of the advantages to having the higher initiative sequence is you can move and complete your movement before opponents with a lesser movement can complete theirs. This would represent this thief in green armor seeing all the other characters trying to move in on him. So when the sage declares they all start moving, our hero declares stop and tries to move this way. Go ahead and take his die off the board. Well, no, I'll leave his die on the board for right now. He had a 5. Now, since he has the initiative, he doesn't have to worry about zone of control from everybody he lost it from. If he didn't have the highest initiative score, if one of these characters had a higher initiative than him, and he moved into their area of zone of control, they could attempt to act upon him. And when we talk about counterattacks and charges, we'll get to that in a second. Now, he was being followed by the character behind him, who now must make an athletics check to try to follow him. Oh my god. She rolled a 20. Yes, I hear my players now screaming at me. And she rolled that. My players often complain that I roll very high when I'm playing the Sage. And actually, that would actually be an epic success, so that's going to be a draw from the hat. Whenever you roll an epic success, you take a chip out. I'm going to turn my head so I can't see what I'm drawing out. The Sage gets a success. Back to the action. So she manages to follow right behind our guy. And since our other character was declaring follow on her, she moves right with her. Because remember, she said she was going to act against her before she had a chance to act. If our thief here had a advantage that allowed her to act right away, she could do so with impunity, not have to make a move. She could actually also have just done that right away if she wanted to, since she did have 1 point higher initiative than her target. Had her target had a higher initiative than her, she would have been able to have done that right away. But she's decided to follow it because after all it puts her close to her buddy, and the two of them staying together is probably a good idea. Where was I? Oh yes. That would actually probably not be enough movement. He'd probably need about 2 more inches. So every movement action is 50 feet. Unless you're wearing armor or something's impeding you, such as rough terrain. Yeah. So essentially, he weaves his way in and out of the crowd and ends up way over here with his people following him, completely avoiding the conflict of the two guys who were NPCs and somewhat, rough and tough, which is why I put miniatures on the board, completely avoiding that combat. And this represents something else unique to Sellswords. I really wanted a system where careful thought and planning would keep you alive. Because the caveat is that if you don't carefully plan and think about, all it takes is 1 or 2 hits in combat to whack you off. Where are we going? Oh yes, and then we still had some of the crowd had 7s. Since some of the crowd has 7s, the sage uses this opportunity to have people swarm in and try to stop the thieves. And to keep that realistic, he has the merchant they're trying to rob shout things such as, "There's a reward if you stop them," which would bring most people in the marketplace to try to stop them. We're now done with our movement phase, and we go into the attack phase. Now, some of the crowd had 7s, so the sage actually has a couple of the crowd members get close enough to pull some attacks off. They would have taken one of their 3 actions to move, and they're extras, so they've got 2 left. And they decide to do what's called mobbing. Mobbing is when, rather than roll individual attacks for every single extra, the sage decides to make one simple attack to speed gameplay with a bonus, representing a bunch of people trying multiple things. This is both bane and boon for him, in that it gives him the ability to increase his acting value. However, it does allow the players with a single defensive roll to get out of the way or parry the attack. And unfortunately, our crowd extras roll a 10, which on their column of 3 is not enough to produce an attack. This leaves our poor heroes now in a bit of a quandary. But before the one guy who had a 5 can act, our hero with the 5 acts. He decides to spend his next action, since he was holding one, to get a sudden burst of speed since he's seen how everyone's going to move, and beat feet through them. And as he doesn't want to fail this because of the situation, he will spend a heroic success. Now, this is not a dodge in combat or a parry, it's a simple skill check. So his success is automatically set to heroic, meaning that everybody around him would have to roll dramatic to get a hold of him. And as they're acting on AVs of like 2 and 3, that's very unlikely. I think a dramatic on AV 2 or 3 is like an 18. 2, 12, 1, 7, 13, 14. Nobody's going to get a hold of him. And he proceeds to beat feet out of the area. All the time listening to his buddy. Actually, would he have enough movement to get off the board? Oh, not quite. All the time listening to his friend behind him yelling bloody murder. Now, as you can tell with the scale of 1 inch equals 5 feet, you can move across a table very fast. So some people like to use a scale of 10 feet equals 1 inch or 15 feet. It's all up to you with the scale of what you're trying to do. The scale is sliding for that very reason. The crowd, having acted on 7, is now acted out. Our hero has used all of his actions. He's acted out. This leaves the next highest in the initiative order, which are these guys, but they don't have a target. So they're acted out. That leaves our hero behind her mark. Our hero behind her mark decides that she's going to clock this person across the back of the head with a blackjack. And she fumbles, giving the sage another chip, because whenever the heroes roll a fumble, the sage gets a chip. And also giving her opponent a free counterattack. Her opponent decides her free counterattack is going to be a wrestling attack, because she wants to capture one of these people. Her opponent now makes an opposed check. She makes a 9 on her wrestling attempt, which is going to end up being, for her AV, a partial success. Our hero now has 2 options. She can dodge this, which allows her to move a little bit on the battle map, but does have some other negative penalties. She can try to parry the blow, or she can try to wrestle it. Wrestling is a very unique thing that way. Since the counterattack is free, it doesn't cost the merchant any actions. It's a reaction. Unfortunately for our hero, actively dodging this, that's going to be an action. Because after all, it's going to require she move. And she's acted out. We call this being harried. One of the things we allow people to do is when they are defending themselves, they may do what's called borrowing actions or becoming harried. They may borrow actions from the next round that would happen, up to the limit of actions they have in a round. She's borrowing an action from next round to perform a dodge. And she doesn't get it. A quick check on the wrestling table reveals that our merchant, as inexperienced at wrestling she is, has a hold of a thief who's having a really bad day, and she manages to produce a hold, meaning the thief cannot leave the zone until she breaks the hold, and the crowd is surging. Yeah. That would be everything. We would now roll a new initiative. So our merchant got very lucky and rolled a 9. Our thief rolled a 4. With her initiative bonus, ends up making it a 5. Our friend here got a 1, but with his initiative bonus, that brings him up to a 2. And our 2 flunkies have uno. And the various people in the crowd have 4s and 3s. Once again, we go into declarations of movement and fighting intensity. Everyone declares standard just to keep this little fight simple. And then movement. Our big tough guys decide they want to try to move in. One moves in to cut off. The other one declares that he's going to follow this character. Meaning that when she moves, he gets to move along with her. Excuse me. Our hero over here declares that he is leaving the battlefield. He yells something about devil take the hindmost to his friend. Some friend he is. And is out of the fight. The merchant, after the crowd, tries to mob and close off this woman's escape as they're all moving. Will try to follow her target. But her target, seeing this, is trying to get out of this situation. So the first thing the hero with the red hair does is she tries to break the hold, which causes her to spend an action. Now, normally this would not happen during the movement phase. But do you remember what I said about earlier? This character had an advantage that allowed her to take an action and then move. That's why that's coming into play now, and it's very useful since she lost the initiative. She does not get out of the hold. So she loses an action, and she lost one action already from this round because she went harried from the round before. She has one mere action left. She decides to test her luck and move out of these zones, and the crowd gets an attempt to try to grab her. Since they have a higher initiative, they can act first on her. And they secure her. Our merchant then moves in last, but then gets to act first, and before anybody else can do anything, the merchant, who's traveling along with her from the hold, I forgot they were holding, decides that she's going to body flip this woman to the ground to pin her. Because once you have a hold, you can attempt to pin. And lo and behold, she gets it. Our poor hero is on the ground. And the next turn, things go very bad for her. She decides to spend a heroic to escape the pin. She'll escape the pin. She tries to run away, but then the sage spends a legendary to have someone clock her in the back of the head. Now, those would still be rolled on their AVs, but I did that so you get a quick idea of how the system works. So that, briefly, is how movement is done in combat and how initiative is done in combat. And you get a sense of how attacks and defenses are done. I didn't get a chance in this example to go much into reactions and actions, but we'll go into that more when we start talking about the next one, which is how to make weapon attacks, parries, blocks, dodges, and the differences thereof. So, once again, in summary, for this lesson, movement on the tabletop battle board is 50 feet per action turn. Characters move in order of the lowest initiative score first and act in order of the highest initiative score. So if someone rolled a 5 initiative against someone who rolled a 4, the person with the 4 would have to move first, but the person with the 5 would get to act first.